If you stay until the end of this story, you'll understand how one weapon survived 3 completely different wars, terrified entire armies, and exposed a brutal truth about modern warfare. Because sometimes history doesn't reward the best invention. It rewards the weapon that refuses to die. And the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, refused to disappear, even when the world around it completely changed. The First World War was a machine built to consume human bodies faster than generals could replace them. Europe had turned into a continent-wide graveyard of mud, steel, and artillery fire. Millions of soldiers were trapped inside trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles, staring at enemies they often could not even see. And every time someone tried to cross the open ground between those trenches, machine guns erased entire waves of men in seconds. Before the war, military commanders still imagined battle as something fast and glorious. Cavalry charges, rifle volleys, flags moving across open fields. But machine guns destroyed those fantasies almost overnight. Suddenly, a single defensive position could stop thousands of attackers. Entire offensives collapsed because nobody could move through the storm of bullets waiting beyond the trenches. The problem was not just the machine gun itself, it was mobility. Heavy machine guns like the Maxim were devastating on defense, but they were enormous. Some weighed nearly 70 pounds before ammunition and water cooling systems were added. They required crews to operate them, crews to carry them, and time to position them. They could dominate the battlefield, but they could not run across one. At the same time, the ordinary infantry soldier still carried a bolt-action rifle. 5 rounds, slow reloads, careful aiming. In calm conditions, a trained rifleman could fire nearly 15 accurate shots per minute. That sounded respectable on paper. In reality, it meant
the armored division should move through this valley by 0600.
Agreed. That secures the river crossing.
As fire and movement. Part of a squad would stop and shoot at the middle or advance. Then they would switch roles. On maps drawn safely behind the front lines, it would appear logical. In real combat, it was a nightmare. Soldiers stopping in open ground became easy targets. Momentum disappeared. Attacks slowed to a crawl before collapsing entirely.
Then came the deadliest moment of every assault. Before infantry attacks, artillery would bombard enemy trenches for hours or even days. The defenders had to stop, otherwise friendly shells would kill their own men. That gap, those few terrible minutes after the artillery stopped, became the killing zone of the First World War. Defenders would climb back up from their bunkers, rush to their machine guns, and open fire on exhausted infantry still struggling through cradled mud and barbed wire. Entire battalions disappeared in that small window of time. The United States Army understood the problem immediately when it entered the war. What they needed was not another heavy machine gun. They needed something completely different. A weapon small enough for one soldier to carry.
This component right here is failing in the
field. To
field.
suppress enemy positions long enough for an assault to survive.
Current specifications won't hold up under sustained fire.
Portable automatic firepower. Not a crew-served machine gun. Not a slow bolt-action rifle. Something in between. Something a soldier could carry directly into the chaos of an attack. A weapon that could move with the infantry instead of waiting behind them. Ironically, the French had already tried solving this problem with the Chauchat. On paper, it looked revolutionary. It was one of the first portable automatic rifles ever fielded in large numbers. One man to carry it. One man could fire automatic bursts while advancing. But the reality was catastrophic. The Chauchat became infamous almost immediately. Its magazines had open sides, supposedly so soldiers could see how much ammunition remained. In trench warfare, those openings simply invited mud directly into the weapon. Dirt clogged the feeding system constantly. Jams became routine. Soldiers learned to distrust the gun almost as much as they feared enemy fire.
The Americans somehow made the situation even worse. They converted the Chauchat to fire American .30-06 ammunition, creating a version
that performed. If you proceed with this deployment, you'll be responsible for the massacre that follows. I'll accept that responsibility, General. Now get out of my way.
And yet, hidden behind all this failure, America already possessed a solution. They just rejected it because of politics. The Lewis gun, the famous machine gun with a circular hand magazine mounted on top, was actually an American invention. Colonel Isaac Newton Lewis had designed it years earlier. Lightweight compared to other machine guns, portable, reliable, and already proving itself overseas, it was exactly the kind of weapon the Army desperately needed. But military history is filled with moments where ego mattered more than logic. Lewis had developed bitter personal conflicts with officials inside the Army's Ordnance Department. Arguments turned into hostility, hostility turned into sabotage. Eventually, the weapon was effectively blocked from adoption, not because it failed, but because powerful men refused to support its creator. Furious, Lewis left America entirely. He brought his design to Europe instead. Britain immediately recognized its value. The weapon became one of the most respected machine guns of the war.
Meanwhile, American soldiers were handed unreliable sure shots, while watching Allied forces successfully use an American, their own military, had rejected. It was one of the most absurd ironies of the First World War, and it created the perfect opening for a man named John Moses Browning. Browning was already legendary even before the BAR existed. He understood firearms at a level few humans ever have. While others searched for complicated answers to trench warfare, Browning focused on simplicity.
Browning approached the problem with a mindset that separated him from almost every military planner of his time. Generals were obsessed with tactics. Browning was obsessed with survival. He understood that no weapon mattered if it failed after falling into mud, or jammed after a soldier crawled through a crater filled with water and blood. Instead of relying on complicated systems like the Shoshat, Browning built the BAR around a gas-operated mechanism that was brutally simple. Inside the rifle, only a few major parts actually moved during firing. The piston, the operating rod, and the bullet. Fewer moving parts meant fewer opportunities for dirt, mud, or chemicals to destroy the weapon. That simplicity became the soul of the BAR. The rifle fired the powerful .30-06 cartridge, the same full-sized ammunition used by American bolt-action rifles. This was not pistol ammunition. This was serious rifle firepower, capable of punching cover, trees, walls, and hitting bodies with terrifying force. And, unlike older rifles, the BAR could deliver that power repeatedly, without forcing a shooter to manually cycle the action after every shot. The finished weapon weighed about 16 pounds. Heavy for a rifle, yes, but shockingly light compared to the machine guns dominating the trenches. One soldier could carry it alone. One soldier could run with it, and most importantly, one soldier could bring automatic fire directly into an assault instead of waiting behind defensive positions. The BAR fed from 20-round detachable box magazines. Engineers experimented with larger 40-round magazines, hoping to increase sustained firepower. But battlefield testing revealed a practical problem almost immediately. Larger magazines made prone firing awkward and unstable. Soldiers could not. Today, the idea sounds almost insane. Military planners imagined soldiers advancing toward enemy trenches while firing continuously from the hip. Not carefully aiming, not stopping to shoot. Simply walking forward under fire while spraying suppressive shots toward enemy positions. The purpose was psychological as much as physical. Keep enemy defenders pinned down long enough for attacking troops to close the distance before machine guns could fully recover after artillery bombardments ended. The BAR was engineered around this exact concept. Its recoil system produced smoother, more controllable firing than many earlier automatic weapons. The sights were borrowed from the respected M1917 Enfield rifle, giving surprisingly good accuracy when aimed properly. Even the fire selector revealed how carefully Browning thought about combat stress. The selector moved from safe to semi-automatic to full automatic, but Browning intentionally made the switch difficult to return to safe mode. Under battlefield panic, soldiers fumbling with controls could accidentally disable their own weapon at the worst possible second. Browning wanted the rifle to stay ready to fire even when human nerves began collapsing. That detail alone says everything about how seriously he understood combat. The BAR team itself reflected the military's expectations for the weapon. The gunner carried the rifle. Assistants carried additional ammunition and supported the advance. One special belt even included a metal cup attached to the side, designed specifically to help stabilize the rifle against the hip during walking fire assaults. Think about how strange that image really is. Military planners envisioned soldiers crossing open killing fields while firing automatic rifles from the hip, advancing directly toward machine guns that had already slaughtered millions of men across Europe. It seems reckless now because it was reckless. But the First World War had broken conventional thinking so completely that armies were desperate for any tactic that might restore mobility to the battlefield. And for a brief moment, the BAR seemed like it might actually succeed. Production accelerated rapidly. By the end of the war, over 50,000 BARs had been manufactured, with tens of thousands shipped overseas to France. But even then, politics and caution interfered once again. General John Pershing feared that deploying the BAR too early or in small numbers would allow German forces to capture examples and study them. At the time, both sides still believed the war might continue into 1919, with even larger offensives planned. Pershing saw the BAR as a potential game-changing advantage and wanted to unveil it all at once in overwhelming numbers. So while BARs piled up inside supply depots behind the front lines, many American troops continued carrying unreliable chow chats into combat. It was another bizarre chapter in the weapon's history. Soldiers were dying with defective guns, while superior replacements sat unused nearby because commanders feared giving away technological secrets. Finally, during the Meuse Argonne offensive in late 1918, the BAR entered combat in meaningful numbers, and the reaction was immediate. German troops had never encountered anything quite like it before. Portable automatic firepower in such a relatively compact package shocked many defenders. The sound alone was terrifying. Unlike slower rifles or heavy machine guns fixed into defensive positions, the BAR moved aggressively with attacking infantry. It created the impression that American troops carried machine guns directly into assault. For the first time, defenders faced automatic rifle advancing toward them instead of firing from static positions. But fate intervened before the weapon could fully prove itself. The war ended only months after the BAR reached the battlefield. The massive trench offensives it had been designed for vanished almost overnight. Walking fire doctrine disappeared with it. The war moved on, the trenches emptied, and the BAR suddenly became a weapon without a clear purpose. For years, thousands of BARs sat quietly inside armories and warehouses. Dust gathered on weapons originally intended to break the deadlock of the Western Front. Military thinkers debated future warfare. New technologies emerged. Tanks evolved. Aircraft improved. Entire strategies shifted away from trench warfare toward mobility and mechanized combat. By old logic, the BAR should have faded into history as experimental weapons in the First World War. Instead, it found
second one in the most unexpected place imaginable: America's criminal underworld. The years between the two world wars looked peaceful on the surface.
Here we see the
but
enhanced
underneath,
rate of fire
America was
selector
changing
switch,
into something far
a
more
vital
violent.
upgrade that offered
Economic
unprecedented
instability, organized
tactical
crime,
flexibility.
corruption, and the chaos of prohibition transformed entire cities into battlegrounds where gangsters often carried more firepower than the police trying to stop them. And sitting quietly inside poorly secured military depots across the country were thousands of surplus weapons left over from the First World War, including the BAR. Criminal gangs quickly realized what kind of power these forgotten rifles offered. Unlike revolvers or shotguns, the BAR gave a single man the ability to unleash devastating automatic rifle fire, capable of tearing through vehicles, walls, and groups of officers almost instantly. It was not simply a weapon anymore. It became a symbol of dominance. Few criminals embraced that symbol more famously than Clyde Barrow. Barrow modified the BAR into something even more terrifying. He shortened the barrel, cut down the stock, welded multiple magazines together for faster reloads. The result looked less like a military rifle and more like a portable instrument of intimidation designed specifically for ambushes and escapes. And for law enforcement officers, armed mostly with revolvers and pump shotguns, facing automatic rifle fire from military weapons was a horrifying experience. The balance of power suddenly shifted. Police departments across America discovered that criminals carrying surplus military firearms could overpower traditional law enforcement tactics with brutal ease. Vehicles were riddled with rifle rounds. Roadblocks became death traps. Officers realized they were fighting men equipped with battlefield weapons, originally designed for war in Europe. The public panic that followed helped push the United States government towards stricter firearm regulations, especially regarding fully automatic weapons. But it also forced police agencies to rethink their own equipment. If criminals carried BARs, law enforcement needed something capable of answering them.
The original BAR had offered semi-automatic and fully automatic firearms. The new M1918A2 removed semi-auto entirely, replacing it with two different automatic firing rates. One slower setting operated around 350 rounds per minute, theoretically improving accuracy and ammunition conservation. The faster mode fired roughly 600 rounds per minute. In clean testing environments, the concept worked reasonably well. On real battlefields filled with dirt, mud, rain, sand, and exhaustion, the complicated rate-reducing mechanism became another part waiting to malfunction. Then came the bipod. Engineers added a folding bipod near the muzzle, hoping to improve stability during sustained fire. Instead, many soldiers discovered it made the weapon heavier, more awkward, and less balanced. The bipod also affected barrel harmonics and could reduce practical accuracy in combat conditions.
I want that ammunition
Even the
moved up to
beloved
the
rear
front
sight from
lines
the earlier
immediately.
BAR versions was replaced with a different design many troops disliked immediately. The weapon gained weight too. What had once weighed around 16 pounds now pushed closer to 20. Soldiers carrying the new BAR through mountains, jungles, or cities quickly noticed every extra pound. And the most important flaw remained completely unsolved. The BAR still lacked a quick-change barrel system. True light machine guns needed interchangeable barrels because sustained automatic fire overheated weapons rapidly. Without spare barrels, prolonged firing risked damaging the gun or causing dangerous malfunctions. Belgian designers from FN had actually offered improved BAR concepts with quick-change barrels before the war.
Fire!
The US Army declined. That decision haunted BAR gunners for years afterward. The 20-round magazine became another limitation.
Move up
At
that
600
slope!
rounds per minute,
We have
a
to
BAR
keep
magazine
moving!
could empty
Go,
astonishingly
go,
fast.
go!
Sustained suppressive fire became nearly impossible compared to belt-fed machine guns. Soldiers often found themselves constantly reloading during firefights, where continuous firepower mattered most. So something fascinating happened once the weapon reached combat. Troops began removing many of the so-called... By the time America fully entered the Second World War, the BAR had become the backbone of the American infantry squad, almost by accident. It was not perfect. It was not modern compared to newer machine gun concepts appearing in Europe. But it was available, reliable enough, and already sitting inside American armories in huge numbers. So the rifle returned to war. Inside an American squad, the BAR gunner quickly became one of the most important men on the battlefield. Officers understood it, enemy soldiers understood it, and most dangerously of all, enemy snipers understood it too. Because wherever the BAR fired, the squad's firepower lived. A standard American infantry squad organized much of its combat movement around the wall. In theory, the weapon operated with a three-man team. The gunner carried the rifle itself. An assistant helped carry ammunition and supported reloads. Another man acted as an ammunition bearer. On paper, the system sounded organized and efficient. Reality was much uglier. Most of the burden usually fell directly onto the BAR gunner himself. He carried the heavy rifle, extra magazines, spare equipment, water, rations, grenades, and standard combat gear, while still being expected to maneuver aggressively under fire.
Suppressing fire!
11 loaded magazines alone gave him 220 rounds, and every pound became torture during long marches or combat patrols.
Move up that slope!
Especially in places
We have
where
to keep
terrain
moving!
itself felt
Go,
like an
go, go!
And because the
BAR represented the squad's primary automatic firepower, enemy troops prioritized killing the gunner first whenever possible. German soldiers recognized the weapon immediately. Japanese troops learned to fear it quickly. BAR gunners often became magnets for incoming fire. That danger became so obvious that American squads trained ordinary riflemen to use the BAR in emergencies. If the gunner fell, somebody else needed to grab the weapon immediately and continue firing. On many battlefields, hesitation of even a few seconds could collapse an entire squad's momentum. The BAR was not just another rifle. It was psychological stability. As long as the BAR kept firing, American infantry could maintain pressure, movement, and confidence. The sound of automatic fire reassured friendly troops while intimidating enemies. Silence from the BAR often meant disaster. German forces respected the weapon even when they criticized its limitations. After the invasion of Poland, Germany captured thousands of BARs originally supplied to Polish forces. Later, they captured additional examples from American troops across Europe. Instead of discarding them, German rear units and anti-partisan forces frequently reused the rifles themselves. That alone says something important. The Germans possessed some of the most advanced infantry weapons of the war. The MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns delivered terrifying rates of fire unmatched by most Allied weapons. The STG-44 introduced concepts that would later influence the modern assault rifle. Yet even with all that technology, captured BARs still remain valuable enough to use throughout the war. Because the BAR occupied a unique middle ground few other weapons truly matched. German infantry doctrine centered heavily around machine guns. The squad existed primarily to support the machine gun team. Rifles protected the machine gun. Ammunition carriers fed the machine gun. Tactical movement revolved around maintaining machine gun firepower.
Move up! Keep moving
American doctrine
forward!
distributed firepower more broadly. Semi-automatic M1 Garands gave ordinary riflemen higher individual firepower than many German infantry carrying bolt-action Kar-98K rifles. The BAR added mobile automatic support
That's the
directly inside
signal.
the squad.
Green and
Even if
orange
one weapon
smoke
failed,
marking the
squad
landing
retained
zone.
significant
The
combat
choppers are
capabilities spread
moving
across
into
multiple
position
soldiers.
despite the thick
It
haze.
created a different battlefield rhythm entirely. German squads could unleash devastating machine gun fire, but if that machine gun became disabled, much of the squad's offensive power vanished with it. American squads spread their lethality more evenly, less concentrated perhaps, but often more flexible during chaotic engagements. And nowhere did that flexibility matter more than the Pacific. Europe was brutal. The Pacific was personal. The jungles, volcanic islands, caves, ridges, and dense vegetation of the Pacific theater created some of the most savage close-range fighting of the entire war. Visibility collapsed to mere yards. Ambushes erupted constantly. Heat, insects, disease, exhaustion, and humidity punished soldiers every hour of every day.
Under those conditions, many traditional support weapons became awkward or impractical. Heavy machine guns struggled inside thick jungle terrain.
Move up! Move up!
Long-range artillery
Keep
became
moving
dangerous
forward!
when friendly troops fought dangerously close to enemy positions. Submachine guns offered useful close-range firepower, but lacked penetration through dense vegetation and natural cover. The BAR suddenly became almost perfect for the environment. It offered rifle-caliber stopping power, controllable automatic fire, portability, and enough accuracy to engage targets across jungle clearings or mountain ridges. Marines especially grew deeply attached to the weapon during island-hopping campaigns against Japanese forces. Combat experience transformed Marine squad organization over time. Earlier in the war, Marine divisions fielded relatively modest numbers of BARs. By 1945, those numbers increased dramatically because battlefield commanders repeatedly demanded more automatic firepower at the squad level. That demand reflected brutal reality. Japanese infantry tactics often emphasized aggressive close assaults, infiltration, and rapid attacks designed to overwhelm enemy positions before superior American firepower could fully respond. Against poorly armed opponents, such tactics sometimes worked. Against American troops carrying semi-automatic rifles and BARs, they became catastrophic. Captured Japanese documents later admitted that American infantry units possessed vastly greater firepower than their own forces. In some cases, Japanese officers estimated American divisions wielded 5 or 6 times the automatic and semi-automatic firepower available to Japanese infantry formations. That imbalance changed everything. Famous banzai charges, once celebrated as symbols of aggressive spirit, increasingly turned into mass suicides against concentrated American firepower. Waves of charging soldiers collided with walls of rifles.
The deeper soldiers moved into the Pacific War, the more the BAR evolved from a support weapon into something closer to an insurance policy against death itself. Marines learned quickly that jungle warfare destroyed careful battle plans almost immediately. Visibility vanished, communication broke down. Units became separated inside thick vegetation where enemies could appear only a few feet away without warning. In those moments, firepower decided everything. A BAR gunner could flood a jungle trail with rifle-caliber automatic fire fast enough to stop an ambush before it fully developed. Against hidden defenders buried inside caves or behind logs, ordinary rifle fire sometimes lacked the shock needed to suppress enemy positions. The BAR changed that equation instantly. Veterans described its sound as unmistakable, deeper and heavier than submachine guns, faster and more aggressive than semi-automatic rifles.
When a BAR opened
They're
fire
everywhere!
nearby, everyone
We can't
knew
hold the
exactly what
line!
weapon they were hearing.
Send reinforcements
So
now!
did the enemy.
Authorization Charlie
Japanese troops
Foxtrot!
adapted over time. Instead of relying on massive frontal assaults, they increasingly shifted toward defensive systems built around caves, tunnels, hidden firing points, and night infiltration attacks. They understood direct charges against concentrated American firepower often ended in slaughter. But adaptation did not eliminate fear. Because the BAR excelled in the exact kind of close, violent fighting dominating the Pacific Islands. A machine gun team might struggle to reposition quickly through dense jungle terrain. A BAR gunner could move with the squad itself, climbing ridges, crossing streams, entering bunkers, and reacting instantly during surprise encounters. It became the weapon that filled the deadly gap between rifles and crew-served machine guns. And in war, gaps kill people.
The physical burden on BAR gunners became enormous. Imagine carrying nearly 20 pounds of weapon, plus loaded steel magazines, grenades, ammunition belts, food, water, and equipment across tropical islands under extreme heat, while artillery exploded nearby. Then imagine doing it for weeks without proper sleep, surrounded by disease, mud, insects, and corpses. That was the reality many BAR gunners lived every day. And still, soldiers volunteered to carry it. Because despite all the complaints about weight, overheating, awkward reloads, and limited magazine capacity, combat troops repeatedly trusted the BAR with their lives. That trust mattered more than any technical criticism written inside military reports. The rifle earned its reputation the hard way. Not in factories, not in demonstrations, on battlefields. By the end of the Second World War, nearly 200,000 BARs had been produced during the conflict alone. Think about what that means for a moment. A weapon originally created for trench assaults in 1918 had become one of the defining infantry weapons of an entirely different world war almost 3 decades later. Very few military weapons survive that kind of transformation. Most firearms belong to a specific era. Some dominate briefly before disappearing once tactics evolve. Others fail because technology moves faster than doctrine. But the BAR existed in a strange category of its own. It adapted not because engineers endlessly perfected it, but because soldiers continuously discovered new ways to make it useful. That adaptability carried the rifle into yet another war, Korea. And Korea was a nightmare unlike anything before it. The Korean War combined brutal winters, mountainous terrain, mass infantry assaults, and rapidly shifting front lines. Chinese and North Korean forces frequently launched aggressive infantry attacks, especially at night. Human wave assaults became infamous during some battles. Under those conditions, the ability to deliver immediate, mobile automatic fire mattered enormously. BAR gunners often formed critical defensive anchors during desperate fighting across frozen hills and defensive lines. Again, the rifle's reliability kept it alive. Not perfect reliability. No battlefield weapon is perfect, but reliable enough that soldiers trusted it under horrific conditions. Mud, snow, ice, rain, exhaustion, fear, darkness. The BAR continued functioning in environments where simpler weapons sometimes mattered more than theoretically superior systems, too delicate for harsh realities. But by the 1950s, the world of infantry weapons was finally changing faster than the BAR could follow. Military thinking had evolved dramatically since the First World War. Nations increasingly wanted belt-fed machine guns capable of sustained suppressive fire without constant magazine changes.
They're
Quick-change
everywhere!
barrels became
We can't
standard
hold the
expectations.
line!
Lighter
Send
materials,
reinforcements
improved
now!
manufacturing,
Authorization
and modern
Charlie
doctrines pushed
Foxtrot!
armies toward more versatile general-purpose machine guns. The BAR was beginning to show its age. Its 20-round magazines remained limited. Sustained fire overheated barrels too quickly. Reload frequency reduced continuous suppression during long engagements. Carrying large quantities of magazines burdened squads heavily compared to belt-fed systems. The rifle still worked, but now it was surviving more from loyalty and familiarity than true modernization.
Even so, the BAR refused to vanish quietly. Early in the Vietnam War, American forces still used the weapon in certain units and specialized roles. Some soldiers appreciated its heavy stopping power inside jungle fighting, similar to the Pacific campaigns decades earlier. Others valued its rugged reliability compared to newer systems, still suffering early reliability problems of their own. Gun truck crews also kept BARs around occasionally because the rifle hit hard, and crews operating from vehicles cared less about weight penalties. That detail says something fascinating about military history.
Keep
Weapons
moving
do not
forward!
disappear the moment something technically better arrives. Soldiers continue using what they trust, especially in war zones where trust can mean survival. A weapon with flaws but proven reliability often outlives more advanced designs that fail under real battlefield pressure. Eventually, though, replacement became unavoidable. The United States adopted the M60 machine gun, a true general-purpose machine gun chambered in the new NATO cartridge. Belt-fed, quick-change barrels, greater sustained fire capability. Designed specifically for the modern battlefield, the BAR had spent decades trying to adapt itself. At last, America possessed the kind of squad automatic weapon military planners had wanted since the First World War. And finally, after nearly half a century of service, the BAR began fading in front years. But the strange thing is this. even when officially replaced, the rifle never truly disappeared from memory. Because by then, the bar had already become something larger than a firearm. It had become a survivor.
Most military weapons are remembered for one war. The BAR became remembered for endurance. It crossed generations of soldiers the way old scars pass between fathers and sons. One rifle, carried by men fighting in muddy French trenches, frozen Korean mountains, Pacific jungles, and eventually the steaming forests of Vietnam. Very few machines survive long enough to witness warfare evolve that dramatically. And the strangest part is that the BAR was never truly perfect for any of those wars. In the First World War, it arrived too late. In the Second World War, it lacked the sustained firepower of proper machine guns. In Korea, it was aging rapidly. By Vietnam, it belonged to another century entirely. Yet soldiers kept carrying it anyway. That reality exposes something uncomfortable about warfare that military procurement programs often ignore. The battlefield rarely rewards theoretical innovation. It rewards weapons that continue functioning while human beings around them are exhausted, terrified, starving, freezing, or bleeding. The BAR earned loyalty because it survived abuse. Soldiers dropped it into mud, slammed it against rocks, fired it until barrels smoked, carried it through rainstorms, volcanic ash, frozen mountain passes, and tropical jungles thick enough to block sunlight. And after all of that, many BARs still worked well enough to save lives. Reliability creates emotional attachment in combat. A civilian may judge weapons through specifications and statistics. Soldiers judge them through memory. Did it fire when the enemy attacked? Did it jam during an ambush? Did it hold together after days without cleaning? Those answers matter far more than theoretical advantages. And perhaps most importantly, the BAR demanded aggression. This rifle was not designed for passive fighting. Everything about it encouraged forward movement. Even decades after the death of trench warfare, the weapon still carried traces of its original philosophy. Push forward, suppress the enemy, dominate the immediate fight through controlled violence. That mentality shaped generations of American infantry tactics, whether soldiers consciously realized it or not. There is also something symbolic about the BAR story that reflects the 20th century itself. The rifle emerged during a moment when warfare transformed from 19th century traditions into fully industrialized slaughter. Old ideas about honor, maneuver, and heroic charges collided with machine guns, artillery barrages, and mechanized destruction. The BAR stood directly in the middle of that transition. It was born from desperation. Generals desperately needed a way to restore movement to battlefields paralyzed by industrial firepower. Browning responded not with elegance, but practicality. He built a weapon around harsh battlefield reality, rather than romantic military tradition. And somehow, that practicality allowed the rifle to survive long after the world that created it disappeared. Think about the timeline carefully. When the BAR first entered service in 1918, aircraft were primitive woven fabric machines barely removed from the Wright brothers' experiments. Tanks crawled slowly across shell craters like mechanical accidents. Radios were unreliable. Most armies still depended heavily on horses for transport. By the time the BAR finally left major service decades later, humanity had entered the jet age. Nuclear weapons existed. Helicopters carried troops into combat. Missiles crossed continents. Television broadcast war directly into civilian homes. And through all those changes, the BAR remained there somehow, still firing the same .30-06 cartridge designed generations earlier. That level of longevity almost feels unnatural, especially because military technology usually evolves brutally fast during wartime. Weapons become obsolete overnight. Entire doctrines collapse within months. Yet the BAR kept finding new purposes because its core concept remained useful. Portable, automatic firepower. Simple. Brutal. Effective. The rifle also influenced future weapon development more than many people realize. The idea of giving ordinary infantry squads mobile, automatic firepower became foundational to modern combat doctrine. Later squad automatic weapons, light machine guns, and even certain assault rifle concepts all inherited lessons learned through decades of bar service. In some ways, the BAR acted like a bridge between eras. It connected the age of bolt-action rifles and static machine guns to the modern idea of highly mobile infantry squads, capable of carrying substantial firepower directly into close combat. Without weapons like the BAR proving that concept workable, later infantry doctrine might have evolved very differently. But history rarely remembers transitional weapons properly. People remember revolutionary inventions. They remember famous victories. They remember catastrophic failures. Transitional tools often disappear between those larger stories, even when they quietly reshape the future. The BAR deserves better than that. Because this rifle tells a deeper story than simply military engineering. It tells the story of adaptation. A weapon created for one battlefield, surviving long enough to fight on completely different battlefields, against entirely different enemies, under conditions its designers never imagined. Very few inventions survive reality that successfully. Most things break when circumstances change.
We hold this
the BAR
line.
adapted
I
because
want
human
that
beings
ammunition
adapted around
moved
it.
up to the front
Soldiers
lines
modified
immediately.
tactics, adjusted squad structures, ignored unpopular features, removed unnecessary additions, changed how the weapon was carried and used. The rifle evolved not through perfect planning, but through constant battlefield improvisation by exhausted men trying to stay alive. That may be the most important lesson hidden inside the BAR's history. War is rarely won by perfect systems. It is won by imperfect people learning how to survive chaos faster than the enemy does. And the BAR became one of the greatest surviving symbols of that truth.
By the late 20th century,
This component
the
right
BAR
here
no
is
longer
failing in the
dominated
field.
battlefields,
Nope.
but its reputation had
The current
already become
specifications
immortal
won't
inside
hold up
military
under
culture.
sustained fire.
Veterans spoke about it with the kind of respect usually reserved for old fighters who survived impossible odds. Not glamorous, not elegant, just dependable in situations where dependable things become priceless. And that reputation spread far beyond America. Captured BARs appeared across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and even inside post-war insurgencies. Some rifles remained operational decades after their original manufacture. In poorer regions and unstable countries, old military weapons rarely retire peacefully. They simply move from one conflict to another, carried by different hands under different flags. That durability turned the BAR into something larger than national identity. It became part of the global language of war. Photographs from different decades show the same unmistakable silhouette appearing again and again beside completely different soldiers. American Marines in the Pacific, resistance fighters in Europe, police units during civil unrest.
If you proceed
South
with this
Korean troops,
deployment, you'll be
revolutionary
responsible
forces,
for the
security
massacre that
detachments.
follows. I'll
Even
accept
after
that
official military
responsibility,
replacement,
General.
the
Now
rifle
get out of
continued
my way.
haunting battlefields like a ghost refusing burial. Because once a weapon proves itself reliable, people keep finding reasons to use it. Hollywood helped strengthen the myth further. War films, documentaries, and television repeatedly portrayed BAR gunners as aggressive frontline soldiers standing closest to danger. Directors loved the visual identity of the weapon. The long profile, the heavy magazine, the violent recoil during automatic fire. It looked powerful, even on screen. And audiences believed it. The BAR became associated with relentless infantry combat itself. When viewers imagined American soldiers fighting through Europe or the Pacific during the Second World War, somewhere nearby there was usually a BAR hammering away through smoke and chaos.
But cinema only captured part of the truth. The real psychological weight of carrying a BAR was something harder to explain. Veterans often described a strange contradiction surrounding the weapon. Carrying it made you a target, yet squads also depended on you constantly. You became both protected and hunted at the same time. Everyone wanted the BAR nearby during a firefight. Nobody wanted to become the man carrying it across open ground. That contradiction created enormous pressure on BAR gunners psychologically. In battle, the weapon represented responsibility as much as firepower. If the BAR stopped firing, the squad lost momentum. Defensive lines weakened. Attacks stalled. Soldiers around you noticed immediately. Some veterans later admitted they felt almost chained to the rifle emotionally. Even exhaustion became secondary once combat started. Keep firing, suppress it, keep the enemy pinned. Because once your automatic fire disappeared, enemy movement usually increased immediately. The BAR shaped battlefield behavior through pure intimidation. Enemy troops recognized its sound quickly.
The armored
German
division
soldiers
should
often
move through
identified
this
American
valley by
positions listening to
0600.
BAR fire mixed among
Agreed.
different rifles.
That secures the
Japanese
river
forces
crossing.
learned to respect the weapon after repeated encounters where aggressive attacks collapsed under concentrated automatic rifle fire. That psychological effect matters more than many people realize. War is not purely
Dominate space through movement. Carry automatic fire directly into the enemy's face. Even modern squad automatic weapons still inherit part of that philosophy today. And maybe that explains why the BAR remains so respected among historians and collectors now. Not because it was flawless, but because it represented a turning point in infantry combat. Before weapons like the BAR, automatic firepower mostly belonged to static crews supporting infantry from fixed positions. After the BAR, automatic firepower increasingly became part of the infantry squad itself. That evolution changed warfare permanently. Modern armies now expect ordinary squads to possess mobile suppressive capability as a basic requirement.
This
Light machine
component
guns,
right here is
squad
failing
automatic
in the
weapons,
field.
compact assault rifles with high-capacity magazines.
The current
all trace
specifications won't
philosophical
hold up
roots
under
back toward the
sustained
same idea
fire.
Browning confronted during the trenches of the First World War. How do you give ordinary soldiers enough firepower to survive movement under enemy fire? The BAR was one of the first serious answers. Not the final answer, but a crucial one. And perhaps that is why its story feels so... There is another reason the BAR's story still feels powerful today. It exposes how unpredictable military history really is. Governments spend enormous amounts of money trying to predict future wars, future tactics, future technologies. Experts build theories, generals create doctrines, factories prepare weapons designed for very specific visions of combat. And then, reality arrives. The BAR was designed for a battlefield that vanished almost immediately after the weapon entered service. The trenches of the Western Front disappeared. Massive walking fire assaults faded into history. By all logical standards, the rifle should have become obsolete alongside the doctrine that created it. Instead, it survived longer than many weapons specifically designed for later wars.
That irony appears constantly throughout military history. The weapons expected to dominate often disappoint. Meanwhile, strange survivors continue functioning far beyond their intended lifespan because they accidentally solve problems nobody fully predicted. The BAR became one of those survivors. Its continued relevance came down to one brutal fact. Infantry combat, no matter how advanced technology becomes, eventually returns to human beings trying to kill each other at frighteningly close distances. Missiles, aircraft, artillery, drones, satellites, all matter enormously. But somewhere beneath those layers of technology, soldiers still need weapons they can carry through smoke, fear, exhaustion, and confusion. And the BAR excelled in exactly that environment. Even its flaws taught important lessons. The overheating barrel revealed the importance of sustained fire systems. The small magazine capacity highlighted ammunition limitations during suppression. Its weight demonstrated the physical cost of carrying automatic firepower at the squad level.
Complex systems often fail under pressure because they depend on ideal conditions. Simpler systems survive because they tolerate abuse, mistakes, dirt, stress, and unpredictability. The BAR embodied that philosophy long before modern military analysts turned reliability into formal doctrine. John Browning understood something many engineers forget. Human beings are imperfect operators. Combat makes them even less perfect. Fear destroys precision. Exhaustion destroys discipline. Confusion destroys planning. So weapons must survive human weakness. The BAR did. Not gracefully, perhaps, but effectively enough that generations trusted it when survival depended on trust more than elegance. And this brings us to something deeper, hidden beneath the rifle's history. The BAR represents the uncomfortable relationship between technology and adaptation. Most people imagine technological progress as a straight line, where newer automatically means better. The world rarely works that way. New systems often introduce new vulnerabilities. Old systems sometimes survive because their limitations are already understood. A soldier who understands a weapon's flaws can compensate for them. A soldier surprised by unexpected flaws often dies learning about them. That reality explains why militaries frequently cling to older equipment longer than outsiders expect. Familiarity becomes its own form of protection. The BAR survived partly because soldiers understood exactly how to work around its weaknesses. Keep bursts short, carry extra magazines, avoid prolonged, sustained fire, maintain aggressive movement. The rifle demanded discipline from its operators. In return, it offered devastating effectiveness within the limits soldiers learned to respect. And perhaps that is why the BAR still inspires fascination among military historians today. Not because it dominated every battlefield, not because it was technologically perfect, but because it refused to disappear, despite changing eras trying repeatedly to leave it behind. The rifle became a living contradiction. Too old, yet still useful. Too heavy, yet still mobile. Too limited, yet still trusted. Every decade predicted its irrelevance. Every war.
Here we see the enhanced rate of fire selector switch, a vital upgrade that offered unprecedented tactical flexibility.
During some of the darkest moments of the 20th century. It witnessed humanity industrialize violence on a scale previous generations could barely imagine. Trenches filled with poison gas, cities burned by bombers, Pacific islands turned into slaughterhouses, frozen mountains covered in bodies during Korean winters. And through all of it, somewhere nearby, a BAR usually existed. Not as the center of history, but as part of the machinery carrying ordinary soldiers through history's disasters. That perspective changes how the weapon feels emotionally. The BAR was never really about engineering alone. It became tied to endurance itself. Endurance of soldiers, endurance of doctrine, endurance of brutal practical solutions surviving while grand theories collapsed around them. The rifle's longevity also reveals something uncomfortable about warfare's repetitive nature. Technology changes constantly. Human fear does not. A young American soldier carrying a BAR through French forests in 1944 probably felt many of the same emotions as a soldier carrying one through Korean mountains years later. Fear of ambushes, fear of artillery, fear of failing the men nearby, fear that your weapon might stop working at exactly the wrong moment. Those emotional constants matter more than technology sometimes. And perhaps that is why old combat weapons develop such powerful reputations. They become emotional anchors inside chaotic environments where almost nothing else feels stable. Soldiers trust what survives repeatedly. That trust passes through generations almost like old tradition. The BAR earned that tradition through decades of battlefield proof. Not marketing, not propaganda, survival. In the end, the BAR's greatest achievement may not have been its firepower at all. It may have been its ability to remain relevant while the world transformed around it faster than almost anyone could comprehend. Think about the soldiers who first carried it in 1918. Many of them grew up before airplanes even existed in meaningful numbers. Some were born during the final years of the 19th century, when cavalry still mattered and war was imagined through paintings of flags and marching formations. Then, suddenly, they found themselves trapped inside industrial slaughter, where artillery erased entire landscapes and machine guns killed faster than human beings could.
classes. The BAR emerged from the shock. It was humanity trying desperately to adapt to a new kind of violence. And decades later, young soldiers in Vietnam still encountered versions of that same rifle in a world now dominated by helicopters, television broadcasts, jet aircraft, and nuclear superpowers. One weapon connecting eras that barely resembled each other anymore. That continuity
This is the
feels almost
objective.
impossible.
We hold this line.
Modern military
I want
technology
that
evolves so
ammunition
quickly
moved up to
that
the
weapons
front
often become
lines
outdated
immediately.
within years. Yet the BAR survived across nearly half a century because its core purpose remained painfully relevant. Infantry soldiers still needed mobile firepower capable of suppressing enemies while moving through hostile ground. The details changed, the landscapes changed.
The BAR never fully solved that question. No weapon ever could. But it gave soldiers a better chance than many alternatives available during its time. Sometimes in history, that is enough to become legendary.
This component right here is failing in the
because
field.
the rifle repeatedly succeeded in environments
The current
where logic
specifications
suggested it
won't
should
hold
fail.
up under
It
sustained
survived
fire.
mud-filled trenches, despite being born during experimental warfare. It survived mechanized World War, despite lacking true machine gun capabilities. It survived freezing Korean mountains, despite aging rapidly. It even survived into the early Vietnam era, despite belonging to another technological generation completely. Each survival added another layer to its reputation. By then, the BAR no longer felt like ordinary equipment. It became symbolic of persistence itself. Heavy, scarred, imperfect, yet still functioning long after newer ideas promised replacement. There is something deeply human about that. Because people are not perfect systems either. Human beings survive through adaptation, stubbornness, and improvisation much more often than through flawless planning. The BAR mirrored those qualities almost perfectly. It succeeded not because everything about it was
If you
ideal,
proceed with
but
this
because
deployment,
enough parts
you'll be
remained
responsible
dependable
for the
under pressure.
massacre that follows.
That
I'll
distinction
accept that
matters.
responsibility,
Modern
General.
audiences
Now get
sometimes
out of my way.
romanticize old weapons too heavily, imagining them as magical tools carried by invincible soldiers. Reality was ugly. BAR gunners suffered tremendously. They carried exhausting loads, attracted enemy fire constantly, fought with limited ammunition capacity, wrestled with overheating problems during long engagements. The rifle demanded sacrifice from the people carrying it. But it also rewarded discipline and aggression in ways many soldiers respected deeply. Short controlled bursts, constant movement, intelligent positioning. The BAR punished careless operators, but became extremely effective in skilled hands. And that relationship between weapon and operator shaped entire infantry cultures over time. Some soldiers hated the BAR immediately. Others refused to carry it. That software was of confidence. New weapons built the same way every person. That experience changes perception. A rifle that saves one soldier's life may feel sacred forever. Another soldier during a critical moment will become permanently coercive.
War personalizes machinery. The BAR accumulated thousands of those personal stories across generations. Stories passed between veterans, quietly, after wars ended. Stories about desperate defensive lines, jungle ambushes, night attacks, frozen hills, broken magazines, endless marching. Moments when automatic fire arriving at exactly the right second changed everything. Those stories became the rifle's real legacy. Not production codes, not technical specifications, memory. And memory is powerful because it survives longer than steel. Most BARs eventually disappeared into warehouses, museums, private collections, or scrapyards. But the reputation stayed alive because veterans carried it forward through stories. Historians amplified those stories. Filmmakers recreated them. Collectors preserved surviving rifles almost like artifacts from another civilization. In a way, they are. The BAR belongs to a brutal century where industrial warfare reshaped humanity permanently. It witnessed the rise of mechanized conflict, total war, global ideological struggles, and technological acceleration unlike anything history had seen before. And through all of that chaos, the rifle remained strangely grounded in simplicity. Wood, steel, gas operation, 20-round magazine, no digital systems, no advanced electronics, no complex targeting computers. Just a heavy automatic rifle carried directly into danger by exhausted human beings relying on instinct and discipline. Maybe that simplicity is part of why the BAR still feels emotionally powerful now. In a world increasingly dominated by invisible technology, there is something brutally honest about a weapon built around direct physical reality.
The story of the BAR is ultimately not about a rifle. It is about endurance under pressure. A machine built for one nightmare, surviving long enough to fight through several more. And maybe that is why the weapon still feels strangely alive inside military history, even now. Because the BAR never had the luxury of existing in ideal conditions. It was born inside the mud and terror of the First World War, where entire generations vanished under artillery fire before they even understood what modern combat had become. It entered service too late to fully prove the tactic it was designed for. Then it spent years sitting forgotten in warehouses,
while the world tried convincing itself another global war would never happen again. But history has a habit of dragging old ghosts back into the light. When the Second World War exploded across Europe and the Pacific, the bar returned not because it perfectly fit the battlefield, but because soldiers needed something dependable immediately. And once again, the rifle adapted itself through sheer practicality. Not elegance, not innovation, survival. That pattern repeated over and over. Every conflict exposed flaws. Every generation predicted replacement. Every battlefield somehow found another reason to keep carrying it. And maybe that reveals the deepest truth hidden inside the bar's legacy. The weapons that survive longest are often not the most advanced. They are the weapons human beings trust when fear strips everything else away. Trust is difficult to earn in war. A soldier may love a weapon during training. That means nothing. Real trust only forms under fire, when exhaustion destroys concentration, and survival narrows down to tiny moments measured in seconds. Did the weapon fire? Did it jam? Did it hold together when everything around you collapsed? The war answered those questions well enough for nearly 50 years. That is extreme.
Especially because the rifle survived through one of the fastest periods of technological change in human history. The BAR witnessed warfare evolve from trenches and horses to helicopters and jet aircraft. Most military equipment cannot survive even a fraction of that transformation without becoming irrelevant. Yet the BAR kept finding a place because its core purpose remained timeless. Give infantry portable automatic firepower. Help soldiers move forward through fear. Keep the enemy's head down long enough to survive the next few seconds. Simple ideas often survive longest because reality itself stays simple beneath all complexity. No matter how advanced warfare becomes, human beings still fear incoming fire. They still freeze under pressure. They still depend on momentum, suppression, aggression, and trust. The BAR understood those realities instead. And perhaps John Browning understood something even larger when he designed it. He understood that battlefield weapons cannot depend on perfection, because human beings themselves are imperfect. Soldiers make mistakes, conditions become chaotic, plans collapse, mud enters machinery, fear destroys fine motor control.
There is something strangely tragic about that. The rifle outlived the men who first carried it through France in 1918. Then it followed younger generations into entirely
Here
new
we see
wars
the
that barely
enhanced
understood
rate of
themselves.
fire selector
Europe,
switch,
Pacific
a
Islands,
vital upgrade
Korea,
that offered
Vietnam,
unprecedented
one
tactical
long chain of conflict
flexibility.
where the BAR kept reappearing, like a mechanical witness to humanity's inability to escape organized violence. And still, soldiers respected it. Not because they loved war, because they respected anything that increased their chances of survival. That distinction matters. Weapons become legendary not because they were symbols of destruction, but because they become tied to survival in the memories of the people carrying them. The BAR earned its place through thousands of moments where exhausted soldiers relied on it during the worst days of their lives. Some weapons dominate history briefly through innovation. The BAR endured through reliability. And reliability, in the middle of chaos, becomes almost sacred. Today's surviving BARs rest inside museums, private collections, memorial displays, and forgotten storage rooms. Some still bear scratches, dents, worn wood, and scars from wars fought generations ago. Silent now, heavy relics from another century. But their story still echoes. Because the BAR represents more than machinery. It represents adaptation under pressure, the stubborn refusal to become obsolete, the ability to keep functioning while entire systems around you collapse and rebuild themselves repeatedly. A weapon created for the trenches of the First World War somehow survived long enough to fight in the jungles of Vietnam. That should have been impossible. Yet somehow, the BAR did it anyway.